Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Education special meeting on Thursday, December 7th, 2023. This is our town hall meeting this evening. Call to order this evening with us is Mr. Krasnoff, myself, Mrs. Jacobson, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, and Mrs. Rinaldi. If you would all stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Peterson, will you start us off this evening, please? So our town hall meeting is typically an opportunity for members of the public to come out and talk about our programs, facilities, and finances. We don't talk about personnel matters at the town hall meeting. Generally can come up, raise a topic or a question, and engage with board members can answer as they wish and do a follow-up if you want. Doesn't seem to be too many people here, so I won't limit the time that you have. Thank you for joining us. If you could just state your name and address for the record this evening, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Mick McGarry, president of the FEA. I live at 97 Sleeping Giant Drive in Hamden, Connecticut. I just wanted to say a couple things. I want to congratulate, I realize I don't know if I did that officially, to offer my official graduation, congratulations to the record to our new members. Thank you very much. This can be a thankless job, so thank you. It is ahead of time. And it is, volunteer efforts, and I do understand, and our teachers do understand the amount of time and effort it takes to do this. So it is appreciated, even though it might not feel that way sometimes. I also wanted to say, we had a robust discussion about curriculum last night. And I do think it's important that we keep the lines of communications open and we talk to each other and work things out, because there are many, many different concepts of pedagogy and, what is the proper way to teach English, what's the proper way to teach math, et cetera. But as long as we keep the lines of communications open and we talk things through, I think we'll always find a way that works for everyone, and we come to a common agreement and we can do what's best for students. The only other thing, I will put a plug in since you mentioned facilities, and we talked about turf before. It sure would be nice if we did have a turf field, an additional practice turf field at Ward and Ludlow. It can be very difficult. Some of those practice fields get really beat up. I'm a big fan of grass. I wish that every field that our students could play on would be grass, but it's simply logistically impossible. So with that, and I know it's very expensive, but and we are at a bit of a disadvantage when we travel. When we go to Darien, we go to Greenwich, when we go to Westport. Well, actually not Westport this year, but we ordinarily play on turf, but we practice on grass. And so it's a different kind of experience. So thank you again. And if anyone else would like to come up.
Well, let me just open up to the board and see if anyone has any questions or comments for our guest. Anyone? Mr. Peterson.
Hi, welcome. We can continue our conversation from last night about Oedipus Rex if you'd like. The only thing that I would say about the fields is the thing that we've heard, for some time now. It's a need that we understand that we have. Our athletic community has been very vocal about it, and I do know that Superintendent Testani has talked about specifically trying to find funding for an extra turf field at Ward for the upcoming budget season. I don't know what the status of that is. I would say look, as the budget season opens up, but something he's talked about in public meetings on a couple of occasions. The one thing that Fairfield does not have is a lot of real estate. It's very tricky. Ludlow, I don't know how long you've been in the system, but Ludlow, before we put Ludlow Middle School there, Ludlow had acres and acres and acres of fields. It was a vast expanse of fields that unfortunately we needed to take for the sake of a middle school and that facility usage. So it's kind of unfortunate. I remember a time when we did have the space, we could have the extra flexibility to put additional fields at Ludlow and at Ward, but that avenue's been closed off to us now. I remember several years ago the Fairfield FAF, what's their Fairfield Athletic Foundation presented to our finance committee a proposal to put in additional turf fields at Ward. with their thought that if we put in multiple turf fields at Ward, the whole town would be able to use them. Ludlow could come over and use them. There were some issues that we had at the time with their proposal. Some of them were equity issues. Those always seem to come up, and I think rightly so. It's an important thing to pay attention to between the high schools. Make sure the experience is as roughly equivalent as we can get them with within the constraints that we have. I thought it was a little bit of an overreach. Maybe one additional field at Ward, I think is very doable, and I would be interested to see whether that comes up in the budget that we're about to see.
Thank you. That would be great. It would add a lot of flexibility to practice schedules, et cetera. So it would be very well received, and the athletes would be very happy.
Go ahead.
So one quick point. I don't know how this gets decided, but since you're a coach, I'll put my plug into you that if you get, if the turf field comes forward, and if there's any conversation or consulting about where to place it or et cetera, the one thing that the FAF did that I found very intriguing was they were talking about a whole different setup and configuration at Ward that might make better use of the space. So I'll only just, I'm sure I would ask it if we ended up approving something like this, and you as a coach who has input on this, I would hope you would have input, and I hope some, because again, this whole idea of not having vision always comes back to bite us. And that's true of any organization. I'm not saying that's an FBS thing, but I would just put my plug in that if that happens, that you're part of that process, and with an eye towards who knows where it could end up. And it might be 10 years, it could be 15 years down the road before other steps are taken. But I would hope that would be part of a conversation.
Very much so. And I do think there's lots of space there to be creative with the space. Maybe rethink where the baseball field is, because the utility field, as it's called now, does sort of do a little elbow turn, like a 90-degree angle. And if we wanted to move the baseball field back, I don't know how baseball would feel about playing on turf. That'd be another conversation for the baseball coaches. The ball it bounces differently on the turf.
Better than holes. That's what they deal with now.
So our team did approve a turf field at RLMS in actually a smaller space a couple of years ago. Technically, that's Parks and Rec property, although it sits at RLMS. So I don't know. I asked a while ago at the capital planning work group what the status of that was. So apparently that's moving forward, but haven't seen anything yet. I think they're doing it in the spring. So at least that will be partial, hopefully, if it continues forward. And some of the complication, and I've raised this in the last budget season, was, or the end of last year, is that it's somewhat confusing of who owns what properties. So sometimes it's Parks and Rec, sometimes it's BOE, and then what budget does it go into? So you have some fields that are actually Parks and Rec on school property, and then some fields on schools that are school property. So getting that straightened out, I hope, is one of our long-term goals as well, actually. But yes, I'm pro way more of that.
Thank you. And perhaps Parks and Rec would like it if they didn't have to mow a field anymore. That might be a nice thing.
I'm sure it would. All right. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming for your comments. Hi, welcome. Since you guys missed the intro, I don't know if you've done this before, just feel free to state your name and address for the record, and you can raise issues pertaining to Fairfield Public Schools programs, facilities, or finances. Then we open up for a little bit of a dialogue with the board members back and forth, and that's it.
Lauren Efren, 241 Burr Street, and I just have one question. What's going on with Dwight?
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
I assume you're talking about renovation, or is there something else that you have in mind?
Well, renovation or tear down, rebuild, HVAC, where are we on the waterfall? These are all answer
Okay,
it.
I just want to make sure that there wasn't something new that had
No.
happened and you're throwing it out there
Not
to us.
that I'm
and-
aware of.
And I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I'll just say briefly, I don't think you haven't missed anything. We're no further along than we were the last time we talked about the waterfall. Obviously, what we do have now is a new board and we have a new facilities committee. So what agenda they set going forward as we do that decision-making. And of course, we still have the State Board of Ed looming over us and how that could impact anything that we're doing. But my only input is you haven't missed anything. We are where you last knew us to be, which isn't definitive. I acknowledge that, but we're in that same place and we have to chart the path forward.
Okay, that's fair, and I appreciate that. I think since whenever I took over the co-PTA presidency at Dwight in August, it has just been a constant question from a lot of the parents and the staff. And number one, it's the HVAC, and I know I'm just a broken record. There's so many other buildings here that also need to be addressed, but we're the only ones not on the waterfall. So I think it's just the state of limbo that we're in. And we've been meeting with Angelus, or trying to meet. We've only met once. We're going to meet again with him next week. And we just want to know if there's any leeway. We're to the point of like Band-Aids. We'll take whatever split units we can get and try to push cold air down the hall to all the rooms if we can.
Our next facility meeting is coming up on the 13th at 2:30. So our new facility committee will be meeting, and I'm sure some of this will be discussed.
Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, I just want to say specifically, Dwight is on the waterfall for a full renovation rebuild. There's a placeholder for it. What it's not on for is for a medium-term HVAC project. Where some schools we're renovating just with HVAC. We're not currently, the plan is not to do that, but to wait for the full renovation of the building. Now, of course, as has been said, like we have a new board talking about priorities going forward. These things may change, not yet. We haven't had those discussions yet, but there was always a plan to do it further down the line. Part of the constraint has always been funding issues. We are given a very limited kind of amount of bonding every year by the town, about $12 million for all of our capital projects. And HVAC across the district, I think it's going to be more than $100 million project, all told. That's more than we have on it right now. But what we're finding is, as we're starting these projects, some of them are getting more expensive. And so that's already a challenge for the town to fit into its bonding budget. So these are discussions that we need to continue to have, because these are needs. And we understand that these are needs, and we would like to do them now. But of course, we're not our own funding source. We're reliant on the town for funding. So we do have to try to be a good partner with them as well. One thing that I would say about the split units, because this has come up from time to time, we've been advised on multiple occasions by our building staff that inadvisable to do it that way, except in cases where it's absolutely necessary for some educational needs. Just because the buildings aren't necessarily electrically capable for handling those split units, but it also creates, if you cool a room but not a hallway, it creates an area of damp in the middle. And in buildings from this era, I will tell you that mold is a major concern. So these are all thoughts that so many moving parts. Right. So, I don't want to say no, I don't want to say yes, but many moving parts. But these are discussions that we need to have going forward, because these are kids. And if we continue to use that building or that facility or that piece of property, we need to decide in what fashion that's going to take place.
I just want to make sure that we're still on your radar. That's all.
In terms of the waterfall, it was actually moved up quite a bit. So I believe discussions will start within the next, it's in the facilities committee. We haven't met yet, but I'm assuming it's on the radar.
Thank you.
Yes, Ed Curry, 279 North Pine Creek Road here in Fairfield. I am the president of the Fairfield Youth Lacrosse Association, otherwise known as FYL. And I just want to share my thoughts, the challenges we face with field space in this town. And I'm sorry if this is repetitive, but this is just the platform that I'm now in, which is good. And the strains it places on a nonprofit organization that we're a youth organization. So right now, FYL has over, I think, 700 families involved in the program. And that ranges from grades 1st through 8th grade, boys and girls that are playing lacrosse from late March to early June. So a pretty good season. Tricky season from a weather standpoint, right? When we're playing on grass, because coming out of March into April, you never know what you're going to get. Last year, we had to allocate north of $50,000 to rent fields from private institutions in town. So when I say private, Fairfield U, Fairfield Prep, GFA, and Wakeman. It was actually probably north of $60,000, but I'm not going to get into specifics. As a nonprofit, that's an incredible strain on the organization. And unfortunately, we pass a lot of that on to the families, right? So the fees to play lacrosse for a particular spring season based on where your son or daughter is from a grade level standpoint can be anywhere from $200 to almost $500 in fees, right? And so last year was my first year acting as president. I had been on the board for the previous 6 years, but last year was really my first taste of, holy smokes, like that's a lot of money. And not only that, I think to your point too, the confusion in terms of who owns what field, and I don't want to say own, but who has control, right? Allocation, like exactly, right? So like, and I get it, like everybody's best interest is in heart here in terms of making sure kids, no matter what sport they're playing, have a field to play on. That's what we're all about. But when it gets to be a financial strain on a nonprofit youth sports organization, then we gotta, the bells go off a little bit. So our big push, and I think, and I probably speak for the gentleman here from football, soccer, yeah, soccer, football, whatever. And I know it's a cost, but I also see other towns do it in Fairfield County. And excuse me again if I'm being repetitive and you've heard this before. It's just what I'm seeing. The Dariens and New Canaans and Westports that are just, seems like they just have endless amounts of turf fields, and again, different towns, different cost structures, different budgets. I get all that, but we have a lot of space, right? And so our initial push and preference is to talk about and come to a solution, whatever it may be, to turf more fields. And I know Roger Ludlow Middle School, that's an initiative that I think has been approved, but again, we don't know, right? So where can we look at similar spaces to put more turf in? Ward, I know has been discussed. There's a lot of green there. We just call it green. There's just a lot of green there. Like, what can we do to put more turf out there so that organizations like FYL, don't have the financial strain, but also we just have access. As it is right now, we're limited in the amount of practices these kids can have every week because we only get so much field space from the town and from the high schools, right? So it's 1 to 2 practices a week. From a competitive standpoint, we're in sports, so we need to talk about competition. Like the other towns have their kids playing 4 to 5 times a week, right? And you see the effect of that it has on a competitive high school landscape. Staples High Schools has won, they won 2 state championships in a row because their youth program feeds up and they have field space, every day. And Darien's the same. They have 5 turf fields at their high school alone. Granted, I know it's one high school, but 5, they can just, you go there, you go there, you go there, and like have at it. These players are developing and they're being successful in doing so. So I would say, the push is, ideally, where can we turf, right? Where we can't turf, where can we put less of an emphasis on field preservation? And I get it. As I said earlier, spring season comes with rain and snow, but that also means field closures. And so I get that, but I grew up playing on dirt. You know, I grew up playing on sloped fields. We got through it. Field preservation is, of course, key. We want to protect our grass, but to what point? You know, it's like, can we open up more fields that? And the other thing is, the fields with the grade schools and the elementary, they're all over the place. How do we get access to those fields too? So if it's not going to be all turf, and I get it, turf is a cost, a lot. It's expensive. But where as a town can we say, okay, let's identify these pods of fields, and they're grass, that's fine. But we can open them up more to youth sports organizations, because right now, I mean, what I went through last spring, getting a phone call with, you know, in the middle of the afternoon, telling us we can't play on a field and we can't play on that field for the rest of the season because it needs to be resodded for football in the fall. And we're talking, it's May. And so now I have to call it Fairfield U and spend $150 an hour to rent their turf field because I need to place a team that was supposed to play on that field at 5 o'clock on that other field, you know, at Fairfield U, and I have to pay for it now.
So, I just want to get to the question or what it is that you're wanting
My
us to
whole
engage
point
with, because I
is-
think we all
Yeah.
understand these issues.
I
pretty well.
wanted to share my experience firsthand, first and foremost, of what we have to go through from a youth sports organization and the amount of money we have to spend on fields. The ideal ask is it possible to turf more fields? And I know this is going to be an initiative that's going to be consistent and coming up. And where can those fields be? Ward. Can it be more, Ludlow? The other question is, if that's not possible, how can we work as a town where it's possible just to open up more fields to youth sports?
I got a quick question for you. How many fields you need and how many days?
Yeah, I mean, we need, 5 days, 6, 7 days a week, in the spring, because in grades for first through 8th grade, it's, we're practicing and we're having games on weekends. So 7 days a week, ideally, from public fields.
Yeah, but every team's not
Oh, yeah,
practicing every
sure.
single day.
Let's see, 3 fields at 2 fields at Ludlow, Roger Ludlow Middle School,
I just mean town. How many fields does your program need?
that's a good question.
It's a matter of math, right? So you could have one field, and if it's operating 24 hours a day, you can have one field.
You
So,
can have
I
one
mean,
field.
It's a matter of the math. So
Yeah,
How much space do you need?
I don't have a number off the top of my head. I can certainly provide that based on what we did last year. I look at what we use at Tomlinson. I use what we use at Ludlow from the turf field and Ward and the grass fields, and then what we use from a private field standpoint. But it's double digits. It's between 10 and 15.
I think the more information we have, the sooner we have it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're not the only person that wants fields. So
Yeah. Yeah, I can provide more specifics. How do I do that? Is there an email address I can send that to you, or is there a way to follow up with you guys?
you could send it to the board.
Gotcha. This is a new experience for me, so I don't know the process and all that stuff. So I'm just here, Brandon.
Mr. Peterson.
Hi, thanks. One of the primary things that I would say, you talked about working with the town more. Fundamentally here, our first priority is to the school district and to the students. We, over the last summer, revamped our rental policies for fields and facilities. And in that discussion, there was something I was involved in our Board of Ed Finance Committee. One of the things that we tried to remember was these are resources for the town. And we want to make sure that organizations other than just the schools are able to use them. But at the end of the day, school fields are school fields. And I kind of get what you're saying. If we talk like there's acres of green, right? Can we get more access to them? I think that's a thing ultimately we're going to need to talk about with Parks and Rec, and have that discussion there. I mean, we are talking about, we've continually had discussions for the past several years about how can we turf more fields because we have a school need for them.
Mhm.
But obviously, again, we understand that there's a community demand for these as well. But I think that a lot of our discussions are going to come from that angle that we're trying to improve things for our, keep things at least stable for our students. Talking about, I was a little put off by how much damage can a grass field take, and we can play on dirt. I really don't want our fields to get to that point. And I kind of trust our facilities staff to say some of these fields are not safe. Like, for example, I know there's been issues for years about the renovated soccer field behind Holland Hill because it's got a slope to it. And there's been a lot of concern back and forth. It was happening when we renovated the building, and even after that, we've needed to do more work on that field, and hand in hand with Parks and Rec. So I kind of get what you're saying is let's make it easier for groups to get on the fields, but I don't know at what cost I would be willing to do that. So again, I don't mean to be dismissive, but I'm just trying to, what my priority is different than what your priority is. But I do recognize that we're managing a lot of facilities and a lot of fields that are town resources, and our town should be able to use them, especially nonprofit groups. So that's absolutely a thing for which there's a special kind of wrinkle in our rental policy.
Mrs. Maxon Kelly.
Yeah, so number one, thanks for coming today to share the concern. Just a couple things. Obviously, we as the Board of Ed are not beyond what Mr. Peterson said, which is absolutely across the board. The first priority is that if our schools have needs for those fields on those weekday afternoons, most especially, then they're the ones who get priority. And even they are struggling with field space. That's why we're trying to get some lights added at that new field at Roger Ludlow so that they can practice later into the night. I mean, that could be a difference maker and open up an awful lot. I know also that, Parks and Rec is talking about turfing South Pine Creek. That might be something that's new. But obviously, we don't set the schedule. So there's, that's not exactly something that we as a Board of Ed can do to help you out of your situation. And I do also have to speak to the damage because and because you're new, you may not know this, but we did have 4 or 5 years ago, a lacrosse incident at Roger Ludlow Middle that annihilated the field, took it completely out of commission, and cost a tremendous amount of money to fix. Now, that is an extreme, and I know that's not what you're talking about. But again, obviously, we're sensitive to the idea of our fields getting damaged. But I'm curious if especially, I'm sure this could work better for your younger kids, but do you look at things like, Stratfield has a back field. Now, it is not a competitive field. It is not lined, but it's a big green space. Maybe that spaces like that could be used for your younger groups. And I also actually had a question for you, because I know that, and this is going back many, many years, but there had been talk with FUSA and I don't know if it was Fairfield Youth Lacrosse, but there had been talk of a whole bunch of those town organizations of doing fundraising to help turf upper boroughs. For example, just to kind of be good partners with the town that we have a limited budget. I don't know do you know if anything has happened with that conversation? Because all I know is it disappeared. But that FUSA tournament raises money. They were very interested in giving back to the town in that measure. And I thought that they'd been talking with other organizations about that. Do you know what happened with that?
To your point, it kind of disappeared or just trailed off a little bit. So I think that was like pre-COVID conversation, then COVID came along, right? So I think organizations just kind of locked into what they needed to do to make sure they had a season intact and they got the fields that they needed to field. So, or at least have a season. So I don't know where that dropped off. I don't know where it can be picked up. I think it was a great idea because I think collectively there's so many organizations in this town that can kind of pool funds together and do fundraising, right? And so other towns do it. There's no reason why we can't do it. So to my point about, I didn't mean to be, in terms of like field damage and like, get everybody out there when it's, my point is like, there are some days where like, okay, well, do we make a more precise judgment call on what can be allowed on the field and the participation and play on the field too. So, but yeah, to your question, I should probably reach back out to see if we can regenerate those discussions and, because we can also raise funds for this too, right? So we're not we're not, ignorant of that.
And I think of that field like Upper Burrows,
Yeah.
which really is, that's not used by the schools, as far as I know. That is not, I mean, it is for town use. I know there are a lot of FUSA stuff takes place on there, and I have to assume other organizations as well. It would
Yeah.
seem like a great location.
I don't know if this is in your hands too, or in your purview too, but I think it's an overall issue too, in terms of what I open up talking about, like, who do I go to? Like, Parks and Recs has their towns, high schools have their town, Parks and Recs has their fields, high schools have their fields. Okay, great, but like, sometimes they don't talk to each other, and it's just like, so, again, I don't think this is a question for you all. It's something we need to figure out, though, as a town, is like, Parks and Recs has purview of this set of this field, and to your question about Stratfield, yeah. And a lot of the elementary schools have really nice, big fields. Like, how do we tap into those? And like, what's safe and what's not? Are they deemed safe and what's not? So I think there are avenues to pursue. I guess my overall point just being here is like, I saw it firsthand last year, and like, wow, we're cutting big checks because we need to get on fields, and we're a nonprofit, and that puts a strain on it. So what can we do to improve the accessibility in the field situation? Granted, I know this is more about the students, but just throw it out there.
I think the previous individual who spoke, Mr. Peterson, addressed, and I hear you. I'm a sports mom, 4 kids playing college, et cetera, but not lacrosse, different field, but and requires turf. So I get you. There is also, besides everything that my colleagues have mentioned, the fact that the town has extensive capital needs. There is an extensive capital planning workshop that happened recently. Their town has their waterfall in terms of their priorities and what they need to take care of from a capital standpoint. So do we. It is extensive. So not only do we have how does this rise to the top over sewer or HVAC or roofs or boilers in terms of the funding capacity, it's always a challenge of, you're right, there's lots of fields we could just say, hey, go turf it, right? Woods Middle is another one. If Tomlinson's turfed and Roger Lello Middle School is going to be turfed, well, what about Woods? Right? I mean, that's not, I mean, we could all sit here and think of all the fields that could be turfed. So it does eventually come down to funding and timing, really. So again, where can you go to is one, yes, Parks and Rec, that's Anthony. Also the town in terms of their capital planning and where do these things fit. I know that's to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Sullivan Field was kind of in line with the RLMS. I don't know if I feel like it's dropped off given some other needs. And then we are in charge of our waterfall. So we have 2 turfs on there, but again, they're replacing Ward and Ludlow out in the out years. So, it's a challenge. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Just one other thing I'll put in as a quick plug. If you get wind, if you pay attention and you hear that there is an attempt by any of the town bodies to advance a turf field, what we need are parents advocating on behalf of that, because it's an easy thing and has happened several times. It's gotten, different things that we've tried have gotten cut. So I'll just throw that out there as our ask to you. If you hear that we're trying to advance something, please help us by advocating to those other town boards, because it makes a very big difference.
I would say I'll echo when we have those big capital planning meetings, no one comes to those. So
When's the next one?
I mean, well, the big capital planning workshop for this year already happened, but again, they're always, we're always kind of talking about projects and whatnot. It is always in the fall in terms of the big one with the Board of Finance, and everyone talks about their projects. But now is the time to start planting the seeds for like, what do we want to do next year and so forth, as Mr. Peterson mentioned earlier. So it's an ongoing conversation in between those times when decisions are ultimately getting made. So now is a good time. I talked to Anthony. I'd also, sorry, Mr. Calabrese. I'm sorry, Mr. Calabrese. And it's always on our mind as well in terms of just fields in general and making sure they're well maintained and up to stuff so that we can have safe play as well. So.
Yep. All for that. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. And very helpful too. I think the Roger Ludlow Middle School turf project, I think, had a lot of cross-organization involvement and support, which I think helped, to your point. I think maybe he'll push that over the finish line. So yeah, we're constantly trying to get parents involved and just kind of raise their voices a little bit in terms of what the needs are. So But that's all I wanted to share. So I appreciate the forum. I appreciate your ears, and I'll keep track on when that next capital. Oh, yep. Thanks all.
Hello, Alyssa Kent, 186 White Oak Road. Really just want to talk about, there's a new board here, obviously it's slim pickings tonight, but the most important people are here. It's obviously the first night of Hanukkah, it's the holidays. But wanted to talk about, now that you have your new board, a lot of the things that we talked about over the summer in terms of, we don't have time for this. We don't want to be rushed through these decisions. We want to get parent input. We want to get town input in regards to school utilization and racial imbalance. I'm seeing a lot of movement on the other factors that are involved with racial imbalance, in terms of just people being aware, people that aren't parents that would have had affected kids in any one of those scenarios where it was 50 kids or 700 kids. So I'm encouraged to see the town starting to become more aware and have some inertia to maybe work together, but also acutely aware that that some of those things are going to take a really long time, like a generation maybe. And that we need to be pushing all the things along. And so, personally, I think it would be naive to say that the little break that we have right now is anything more than a break, right? We could be talking about this in real earnest as early as the first quarter of next year, or maybe we get a little longer. I think there's a lot of things that could happen in terms of what I've read and heard. So I'd like to hear what the board is going to be talking about very soon, I hope, in terms of school utilization, placing the ECC, and voluntary movement. And what kind of wild ideas and reasonable ideas that have been kicked around are going to be a priority of this board to really understand, put some numbers behind, and what the plan is to push those forward while we're waiting, because I don't like to wait without doing something.
Who would like to go? Oh, Mr. Krasnoff.
Again, the facilities committee just got reassigned. We have a new committee. Most of the other people actually aren't here today, so I don't want to speak on their behalf, but we are meeting December 13th. And I'm sure a lot of those things will come up in the conversation of what we plan to move forward. But now that we have a new committee, it's kind of, hitting the ground running when we meet with some of those topics that you brought up. So we haven't really had a chance to sit and talk about them.
And that's the highest priority of that committee. I mean, I'm sure there's obviously other things like air conditioning and turf fields, go FYL. I'm definitely here to be supportive of that too. But what does that look like?
I'm sure they're high priorities, but again, the rest of the committee isn't here and we haven't even met, so I can't speak on what their priorities are. I can tell you what my priorities are. They are high on my priority list. But again, I can't speak for them.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, by the way, for having me at Stratfield a couple of weeks ago. We had a very productive conversation with Mr. Bosch and the crew at Stratfield. It was great to be back in my kids' elementary school again. I'll just repeat kind of what I said at the time. I don't know, I kind of rambled at the time, but we really need to wait for what the state is going to decide to tell us. I'm hopeful that we have more time. I'm hopeful that they will work with us on a longer term basis, give us a little more flexibility with the things that they have asked us to do. Hopeful, but also a little scared that that's not what's going to happen. I will say that kind of something you said, I think that it's useful that we've had these discussions over the past year to try to get the word out as far as we can into the town, that this is a topic, that the racial balance issue is not going to just evaporate. It's going to be something I think the state is going to continue to press in one form or another, either harder or softer. And so, and again, I think I may have mentioned this when I came to Stratfield. My original thought for this was that we might have years to work with it, have a lot of parent input, really get a lot of, buy-in from the town. I still would like to see that if that's something that we can see. But while all that's happening, you're asking what our priorities are. Our priorities are that all the time. One of the things that we were talking about, even when we were asking the state to revisit their decision on racial balance, we have special programming needs that are only getting more pressing for us. You mentioned the ECC. That's something that I've been paying a lot of attention to. I would love to find a sole facility, get that program back under one roof. That's a big ask, but like, these are discussions that we need to keep having on an ongoing basis. So I think we're in a lull now, and it's nice. And I'm trying to be conscious of the fact that, like, for the moment, the pressure is off. But I don't even know that we can start having meaningful discussions until we know what side the state's going to come down on.
So just if I can respond real quick, one thing I've noticed is that, and I think this is very predictable, the temperature is way down, right? So we can have really, really meaningful, collaborative, smart conversations about what this looks like. What are the real roots of this? What are the ways to solve all of those different aspects that the symptom is racial imbalance in our schools, but it's the symptom of many other things going on. So when we talk about a lull, I think that's like the best opportunity to really come up with some kind of wild ideas and really bounce them around, because people aren't like scared that their kid is going to get moved next year. It also feels like the right opportunity to be thinking about, what if we had a couple years? What could that look like? When in my profession, I'm in architecture, real estate development, so I understand the zoning and economic side of this problem much better. But I've come to learn the school side. But I like to tell my team, it's much easier to go to boards or things like that with a solution, even if it's not maybe what they would have come up with on their own. So my fear is that obviously we're not going to go to them with a solution in January, but my hope is that they open the doors to coming up with another solution, giving us some more time, that's more directed by us than by them. And that's what I would love to be seeing right now, is like, thinking about bigger ideas, multi-year, opt-in, voluntary movement, kind of things that we know from what we heard all summer is much more favorable by the town and the people that have come to talk, right?
I guess in response to that, I would say a couple of things. If you were watching a couple of weeks ago, we had a presentation from about the town's draft plan for conservation and development. Oh, you were here. You were here. But one of the things that I think you heard at that meeting was this plan had been developed largely with no input from us. Talking about, well, where are we going to have higher density development? And that's only going to be 0.13 kids per unit, as if that's not going to matter to our calculus. And I'm hopeful that, I think that it was a productive meeting for us to have, for us to all say, and I think we were all saying, we really need to be partners in this discussion. This should not be something that should be taking place without our input, because it's going to have a direct impact on how we're able to deliver our programs to the town's children. So those items, that kind of integration, that kind of townwide discussion, I am absolutely all in favor of that. It's easier to say that than to organize that, but I know that we have kind of often felt on the board, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, I can only speak for myself, it would be nice to be involved in a lot of these bigger discussions. Because, one of the things that is true about the racial imbalance discussion is has a lot to do with the geographic location of housing stock, over which we have zero control or say.
totally understand that. That's the piece that I understand the most. I've sliced and diced this data on housing, especially in the past few weeks, to really dig even deeper. I'd love to share at some point what I've sort of learned about the dynamics of the housing stock here in Fairfield. And I think it would help your board understand really how long it will take to have an impact, both in the solvability factor, but also in terms of what we will see and what we, quote unquote, don't know, like the effects of the POCD, and kind of immediate developments in the next 10 years. I think the housing problem we see right now is the effects of like 50 to 30 years ago, right? Truly. So for me, I'm super interested in it because I don't want my grandchildren to, be in the town of Fairfield and being redistricted every 8 years. I think, that whole idea of the tree, the most beautiful tree on your street was planted by somebody with some vision, like, 100 years ago. But so that's what I mean by, that's something that we have to work on, but isn't going to solve the problem that we're faced with right here in front of us too.
Can I just offer I've often thought about this phrase, like the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. The second best time is right now.
Go ahead, Mrs. Maxon-Canale.
Yeah, so Mr. Peterson covered the POC. Obviously, you were here, you heard our discussion, and I think if Mr. Wendt had any doubt about where we stood, and I don't think he did because I think he's a smart man and he heard us, but we were pretty unambiguous about that, and that's even as a new board. But I do have to agree with Mr. Peterson that we have to wait for the state, because here's what I know about all of my years of working with parents. You can only tap into them so many times. And the temperature is down right now. I agree with you on that description. Unfortunately, that also equates to a great deal of disengagement happening very quickly. And if we start making steps forward we're going to start looking at some voluntary things and we start roping some parents in, and then the state says something that we don't expect, and now we're turning gears, and now there are going to be parents who feel like we wasted their time. Why did we do all this? And so it's knowing that they're asking us to report to them is imminent. As much as it's hard to be patient, and as much as I couldn't agree with you more, there were a lot of ideas that were floating out there that it'd be nice to start thinking about, but that we already have started thinking. There has been conversation. There has been a great deal of thought from the board and from members of the public, but not knowing what they're going to say to us. I would be very hesitant to start saying, well, let's start planning regardless of that and we'll just adjust, because we don't know how radical their response or not is going to be. But I appreciate your bringing this up, because if they do what we hope, which is give us time, amend, come up with more ideas, that's when we really can say, okay, let's hit the ground running and start doing exactly what you're saying. But I would be really hesitant to start earlier than that. On the topic though, again, great that we've had that POCD conversation, and I don't think we're going to let that one go. Some of the TPZ members have been reaching out to us to try to find out more now that they heard about the meeting. Unfortunately, none of them were here, which would have been really helpful. But, and then the other factor, of course, is that a lot of those ideas could involve money or not. And so before we start trying to think of any plans that could involve any money, the town would want to know, do you have to do X, Y, or Z? And thus it keeps coming back to, what does the state tell us? And then we can take it from there. But that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Krasnoff.
And what I was saying is, I do think there's work we can do on the facility side just to prepare. But like everyone else said, it's really hard to actually put a plan into action without knowing what the plan needs to fix. So we can lay the groundwork. We know where our facilities are. We're not changing that. We do have some projects on the horizon. There's things we can look at, but it's really hard to put a plan into action until we know what the action needs to create, what kind of result.
Right, with the exception of the ECC and maybe opening up some room at Stratfield
Correct.
for potential special programming or something else. Who knows?
The ECC is a priority, I believe, for all of us. I can't speak for everyone, but I know Mr. Peterson agreed.
And it is also on our next Tuesday agenda, at least an update. I think that's just a vague update on the ECC, but again, that is a topic that is not falling off our radar.
Okay. So I'll land a little bit in the middle here on this. So I feel like when it comes to racial imbalance, I agree with my colleagues that we have to have the conversation with the state to see what path that may look. But in the meantime, as our resolution stated, we know we have facility issues. We know we have utilization issues. We know we have ECC issues. So in my mind, even if like racial imbalance didn't exist, like take that off the table for a minute. We know we have work to do, facilities, for specialized programming, for utilization issues, regardless of them, right? So I think that's a priority of mine and of this board, and I know of the community too. I mean, there are people who have talked about facilities this evening. So facilities committee, waterfall, town planning, all connected, right? While we wait for their meeting, which we don't know. We haven't gotten informed yet. So I know that I will inform the public when we do know when that is. As for, I'm not going to repeat some of the, you were here the other night on the POCD. It's something I've been talking about for quite a number of times. So I am kind of about happy is the word. But I don't know how I would describe it, but that the community now is understanding more about our community as a whole, rather than everyone loves their neighborhood, everyone loves their school, everyone loves their part of their town. But understanding how we are one town and how one thing trickles or domino effect into the other. So I agree with you. I'm super excited about that. I would love to see a committee formed if they go that route. I would love to see, we've got new administration. We've got people now who are interested. We have excellent talent from the community who are parents, such as yourself. We have interested board members. If they decide to go that route, I think it would be wise for them to do so, to get a little bit more input on that. But that's all I have for that for now. And I would just say we might be in a lull on this, but this board is definitely not in a lull on lots of other important issues besides our facilities and redistricting. So have to always keep in the forefront of our mind too, some of our more academic and budget seasons coming up. So never a dull moment, shall we say.
Yes, no doubt that there's way more on your plates than just the thing that dominated our summer, right? So thank you. And I appreciate you all being so engaged with the other town bodies. And I think the momentum's there, and you have a lot of grassroots support behind really looking at it holistically. So thank you, guys.
Hello, Laura Veneman, 106 Blue Ridge Road. I am a parent from McKinley, and one of the things that I think came up throughout all the many meetings we had about redistricting was definitely the capacity issue that exists in many of our schools. I know it has come up recently that McKinley particularly is over what the class size projections are supposed to be. And I was just curious if there was any, obviously, it keeps being discussed, what can we do to be getting, not that I want to dwell on test scores, I don't think it's everything, but what can we be doing to get, the scores improved, and how do we make sure our kids are academically being successful? And I do believe it comes down to class sizes. So I was just curious if there was any further conversation in terms of what we could be doing to try to get back to where the class sizes were supposed to be in McKinley.
Mr. Peterson.
Hi, thanks for your question. I would say that we discussed this a little bit in the October Finance Committee meeting, because at the time, we wanted to kind of see where the enrollment numbers for the new year landed, because there's always that September, that first month of the year is dynamic. People, kindergarten registrations coming out of nowhere, and occasionally classes breaking up or being formed together. The issue that you mentioned was spoken about at some length by Superintendent Testani, and what he said at the time was, they made a decision kind of in consultation with school administration and, an administration here at central office, that there was not as compelling a case to break up a classroom at that point, to split it, if we're just one over our guidelines for that. I will say that Board of Ed policy on class sizes, and this is kind of a weird little wrinkle, I'm pretty sure our class size maximum is like 30 in our policy manual. That's not where we fill to. We fill to lower levels in the administrative regulations. So it's kind of under the superintendent's purview to deal with that, as long as it doesn't bump against the hard cap that we put in. And so he made the executive decision, to call it that it would be more disruptive to split up a classroom, and that they were going to monitor on an ongoing basis to make sure that it wasn't going to have any detrimental effects to the kids in that classroom. So I know that that is something that has gotten an increasing amount of attention, but they were just trying to weigh at the time the benefit of splitting up versus the disruption of splitting up. We got a lot of, through the years, we've gotten a lot of emails from parents saying, why is my kid getting split out of a class? They got assigned to a class. They had to split the class. So, with that dynamic in play. But your fundamental question about test scores, and I hear what you're saying. And as you know, McKinley already has guidelines that are lower than the rest of the district. And to the degree to which we keep those guidelines, obviously, the better. We do like to support McKinley because of its unique constellation of needs. So, I think that I just want to say that's on our radar. I know that's on the superintendent's radar. We've discussed it at the committee level. And again, it was an executive decision kind of weighing the pluses and minuses.
One thing I just want to add to that, obviously our school is known for, we definitely have big influxes throughout the year, people who move to the area, people who leave. I know it can make it very difficult in terms of trying to project kind of what the class year is going to be. Our school has obviously been a period of, great change. We were without a principal for a while, so I think we just want to, now that we do have a place principal, I just kind of want to put it back on the radar screens that I think smaller class sizes is what benefits our students. I think we've seen success in smaller class sizes in terms of working with those high need students that does exist within our school. And given that we do have some of the largest class sizes within certain grade levels, I really do hope that in long-term planning, we can look to get those class sizes back down.
I'll go. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'd like to see the whole district have lower class sizes, to be quite honest with you. We're out of line with some of the districts in our area that have published guidelines on that. But one of the issues is too, though, is lower class sizes means more sections, which means more classrooms, and you've already got 24. So you've only got 24. So if we made them smaller than what they are now, even with your enrollment, there wouldn't be a classroom. Or you'd have to put art on a cart, and then you're having a disparate academic experience, or music goes on a cart or something like that, and you have to give up your music rooms or something, you know what I'm saying? So there's definitely a capacity issue as well as the class size issue, right? Because McKinley is in the area that has the highest population density, and that's what's happening there. So again, coming back to some of the other issues, something I feel, if it continues to grow, which it seems is going to be the case, possibly, especially if town just keeps putting, more there, regardless of anything else, there's probably going to have to be some sort of movement at some point. Otherwise, you guys need portables or something, right? And I don't think we want to do that. So, and as far as the test scores, there's nothing, I don't remember, even before I was on this board or during this board, that any of our superintendents have put in a budget for supports for ELL, for SRBI, for special ed, for LAS, for MST. I don't recall anyone not supporting any of that. Paras, whatever, increasing pay, our salaries for our paras and support. So I believe we have a strong support for what our schools and students need at this table, and in central office and in our buildings. So when there is something that is extra or more that might be needed there, and I'm happy to support that. So whatever it may be that the administration and our educators feel would be helpful. So that's that. Plus, McKinley does get, grant funding too. So we're able to have some extra grant funded educators at that building. So I hope you know that we're keenly supportive of whatever the needs for all kids, but at McKinley too.
Yes, and I do want to thank you guys. I certainly don't think that you guys would not support something if it were to come to the table for the school. I think I think our school's a little sensitive to the fact that, when the conversation about it, the entire redistricting was on the table, it was one of those, well, we don't want to go there. So I think it's kind of opened up the book for a lot of parents just to say what is going on within our own school, and really just trying to ask the questions to understand what is happening within our school that is different from the other schools within the area. So I appreciate everything that you guys are doing. I just want to call out the class size thing because I know it's a capacity issue. There's only so much that we can do with the space that we have. But I do think that smaller class size would specifically help our population. Thank you.
Feel free if anyone has anything else you'd like to bring up. Budget season's coming up. Anyone have any ideas on budget? Besides in 10 new turf fields? Okay. Well, I'm super psyched that we had some people come today. And we're actually not able to have a good conversation. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. Really appreciate that. And we'll do it again. And when it's got some good stuff for us to talk about with the community, because I think these are really nice for us to have when they're timely and people can raise issues with us and we can talk back and forth with everyone. I mean, we did a lot last year because, we wanted to have those redistricting community conversations, but I think they're great. So unless any other board members have anything, I'll take the motion to adjourn. Oh, sure, Mr.
I
President.
just want to wish everyone out there happy Hanukkah.
All right, can I get a motion to adjourn? Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously, 5-0. Thanks, everybody.